sure in which order we want to do this, but in my little list here, Dr. Daniel, I think you're first, so maybe we'll start with you. We're going to hear a little bit about each of our guest speakers, which is nice. Thank you.
So this is a little bit of a tough topic because I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, and if you talked about yourself, you got beat up. So self-deprivation is not something that comes easy for us. And so anyway, I grew up in a place where, intensity wasn't always understood, but hard work was. And so I was born in central Kentucky. And so really the theme of this is to know yourself. And this is really based on 2,500 years ago, carved in the stone walls of the temple of Apollo. The Oracle of Delphi gave instructions: know thyself, know nothing in excess, nothing is certain. And so the problem is I've spent most of my life wrestling with the second one, nothing in excess. I've always done everything besides moderation. If something got my attention, then I'm into it forever. I can create a hoard of guns or whiskey, whatever it is I'm in at the time. And I don't disappear for just a few minutes. I could disappear for weeks, months, and even years. So the reality is that we're going to concentrate on this excess, because for a long time I thought this was a flaw, getting lost in my head. Teachers saw distraction, the parents saw distraction. They didn't see the immersion. They saw somebody that couldn't focus on anything, and what they didn't see was I was completely focused on one thing. The house is burning down around me, I'm doing what I'm doing. But the problem is with this focus, I didn't have an off switch. There's no dimmer, because if it matters, my attention gets really narrow. And as I got older, I started to understand that it really wasn't a problem. I don't have a problem paying attention. I have a problem stopping. So the challenge hasn't been focus. It really has been alignment. And so the reality is, later in life, as I got into practice and having been down the rabbit hole for a lot of different things, I encountered a model that helped me to understand this. It's called the flow model by McKelly, a psychologist who passed recently, and he describes something called the flow state. And this is when a skill level is low and the challenge is low, we become bored. When the skill level rises, but our skill can't meet this challenge, then we become very anxious. But when the skill and challenge rise together, we enter a flow state. And for years, people thought I was distracted. The reality is the challenge was too low and my mind would drift. And then as I started trying to figure out what this was, and so I've always tried to find that space in the line and to remain there. But the other thing is, attention wasn't always part of my story. I played music when I was younger, and I played in a band, and they always turned my microphone off. Number one, I couldn't, my voice sucks. Number two is I could never remember the words to the song to save my life, the verses. I couldn't even remember the title. And today I can't reliably tell you the name of a song or its lyrics, but I know the tone, I know the progression, and I know the structure. And I could play anything from ear, and I found I couldn't really understand what was going on. And for years I thought this was another flaw. I can remember a lot of stuff, but I can't remember specifics. And then I really became a fan of Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Think Fast and Think Slow. And he explains that much of our intuitive thinking works associatively. Once an idea triggers another, connections form rapidly, often outside of our conscious awareness. Creativity can then emerge not from our linear recall, but from a lateral connection. And I realized that I can't remember a list. I can remember relationships, however. I can remember context, I can remember structure, I can remember balance, and this innovation really depends on this type of relationship. And in the operating room, I don't think in list. I think in space, I think in vectors, I think in tension and release of tissues. If one maneuver shifts this, what does it do to the other one? This associative thinking allows you to reconfigure what you know. Not by inventing something from nothing, but by recognizing the connections that you haven't seen before. So creativity in surgery isn't impulse, really. It's really disciplined rethinking relationships about what you're doing in the operating room. Long before I entered the operating room, however, I had to train perception because I was a child. I could sit and draw forever. I drew horses for 12 hours at a time and I wanted a horse, so I got one, fell off of it, and then I quit drawing horses. But it allowed me to study proportions, motion, where the weight falls in pictures, and then it also gives you observational skills. And our craft in surgery really begins with observation because our hands can't do what the eyes can't see. The eyes can't see what the mind doesn't learn to recognize. So that's what art teaches you, is observation. But then I have another type of training, which is motion. I was juggling all my life, and it looks chaotic. This was what I was doing during COVID, trying to make up the time. And it's not that it's a pattern. There's a pattern out there, but you can't track every object independently. You have to see rhythm. You have to know the timing of things. And so this is spacing, looking at something spatial, but not looking directly at the object. Also, I took up windsurfing and was obsessed with windsurfing for years. And it taught you to look at your circumstances. The wind shifts, the water moves, your balance on the board changes. So you don't memorize rules, but you have to respond to the conditions as they're presented to you. So it trains you about intuitive correction, which is what we do in surgery every day. And then there's the element of stillness. I love to fly fish, I love to fish, I sit outside doing nothing, waiting for something to happen. I like to hunt, these are things I do. And it's not really passive, you're not just sitting there, you're disciplined to observe what's going on around you. In that water, you're looking at the current, you're looking at lights, you're looking for subtle movements that other people overlook. It must be sensed. The stillness teaches you restraint. And this is very important. It teaches you what not to do next. The motion teaches you adaptation. Stillness teaches you perception. And both of these are essential in the operating room. Because in the operating room, we need to know that stillness is not inactivity. It is control. Our tissues will respond. Tension is redistributed. Light reveals a different structure, like in zone 3. One adjustment changes 3 other relationships. So you can't impose the form. You have to respond to it. You have to understand that surgery is a dynamic balance. It's not rigidity. It's not force. It's continual refinement. And so for me, it really is a craft that requires significant discipline. I have to look at these types of practices. These are things that I've gotten from Charlie Munger, that where you have curiosity and a willingness to learn. So this is where your experience meets reflection. Your own experiences, talking to you guys here, I learned something from everybody, questions in the audience, from articles, the books we read. This is the curiosity that goes on. We also need to monitor and we need to measure what we're doing. We need the courage to be honest. And that doesn't mean honest on social media. That means being honest with yourself when you're looking at what you're doing. And ego is a very powerful enemy and when it comes to understanding the reality of yourself. And we also need to solicit external feedback because external feedback gives us a critical thinking measure. For me, I've been in a wormhole of education my whole life. I was going to be an academic surgeon until I made it 6 months and I went out and took a private practice craniofacial job. But my whole life has been revolving around education just because it's fun to learn something new. Now I realize I'm not old enough or young enough anymore to know everything, and it's kind of refreshing to be able to say, I don't know and I've made big mistakes, because that's what you can do when you start to get a little gray or a lot of gray. And once again, I like to give credit where credit is due. Robert Acklin changed my life. He had obsessive-compulsive tendencies for anatomy, and he beat into me that anatomy is critical. A thorough knowledge of anatomy allows you to color outside of the lines in surgery. So he is going to be first and foremost in my mind to get me to do what I do. A long-standing friend of mine is Ernest Hemingway reincarnate. For years, I've sat around drinking the finest scotch, talking about the finest books, and sculpting with my friend. We have home in the Bahamas that we hang out with. as we were innovating these new things, it was good to have friends that were also trying to innovate. Francisco and I were on a panel in New York City, and Dan Baker stood up and said what we were talking about, deep neck lift surgery, was not only malpractice, but he would actually testify against anybody that had a problem doing what we were doing. So it's good to have friends that can take these arrows as you're moving along. The other thing that's critical is we develop great friendships, but I get to hear things from a different perspective. You travel around the world, everybody's getting great results, and how'd you get that? And I'm not arrogant enough anymore to actually believe that somebody else can't get a good result. I mean, it's not a sum-zero game. So these guys have had an unbelievable influence on me in the last dozen years, listening to what they have to say. So I'm always changing myself. And there's no question that having young people, I'm jealous that between Graham and between Brian, all the fellows that they've had, people come and visit, and I've had residents come, but they're not really invested in learning to what I do. And having these young people and being around Brian and these people that are obsessed with anatomy has been critical. So the last thing I do is, because I'm from a small village, the people went to school so they didn't have to work on the farm, is that I teach myself to write, because when I write something down, it leaves no space for poor thinking. Because when your invisible thoughts are made visible, you're forced to confront them as they are, not as you wish them to be. So when I perform a facelift, I don't begin by looking backward. The photographs of youth I use as instructions, they're reminders. I don't study them for details. I look for relationships, the light, the balance, proportion. Time doesn't destroy people's identity, it rearranges it. So it really is up to us to decide how we're going to do this. Motion taught me dynamic balance, stillness taught me restraint, art has helped me understand perception, and surgery demands all of these at once. And discipline taught me the humility part. So because in the restoration process, what I do predominantly, I'm not trying to create a new person. I'm trying to recognize what has always been there. And once again, the eyes can't do what the mind doesn't know. We need to learn it. We need to recognize it. So mastery is not about intensity alone. And using the gifts you were given is important stewardship. Developing them, refining them, measuring them, protecting them from your ego, and applying them with care. Some minds skim, some minds dive deep. Know your intensity, know your boundaries, and build a life and a craft deep enough to hold the gifts that you were given. So I really appreciate you guys for allowing me to be here. It's been a great opportunity to speak to you. So hope you're not bored of my voice, because I got more tomorrow.